like, praise the Lord. We had to. It was one of those things. Our connection was slow, and sometimes with this, you just have to unplug and replug. Probably you should do that before every broadcast. That way, at least. I mean, there's no guarantees. All right, so we're going to begin again. MAiD in Canada, Eerily echoes on that CT4 program, Action T4 program, or Aktion. And I've got a number of articles as well that I want to go over today. And we're going to see the parallels. We're going to see the downward slope. You never, the thing is, with something like this, which I'm totally against from the beginning, assisted suicide is just murdering yourself. That's what it is. So it's murder. Or it's a violation of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20 and verse 13. And state-sanctioned suicide is murder. So here in Proverbs, our opening text is, For whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. That's wisdom, godly wisdom, wisdom from above. But he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. And we really could say, all they that hate God, hate his word, hate the word of God, love death. And we live in the death culture today. Under the guise of compassionate dying. And this is what I wrote here. Rejection of wisdom is an act of hatred toward God, or towards God. Right? Fools announce their hatred for God. And the Bible says that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And fools announce their hatred of God. And I know Brother Jacob Yates, he's experienced it out in the streets. Brad, you've experienced it out there when we've been out in the street preaching the gospel to the heathen, to the lost, and they hate God. There's an inveterate hatred for the Lord, and they hate wisdom from above. And they announce their hatred for God when they reject divine wisdom. All that hate me, right, love death. In this country, there's a lot of hatred toward God. And as a result, our nation has readily embraced a culture of death. We live in a death culture. So whether it be at the abortion clinic or by lethal injection administered by a physician under the guise of compassion in dying, that's what MAiD is couched as. Canada, this nation of Canada, has openly embraced a culture of death. For the Bible says, all that hate me love death. So again, I'm going to give you a brief history. I'm repeating this. Obviously, I read this a little bit earlier before we died out, but I might as well repeat it because we're going to delete the other, that little short live stream that we had before our connection died out. So what is MAiD and its brief history in Canada? The question is asked here. Well, medical assistance in dying, MAiD, is Canada's legal framework for what is elsewhere often called physician-assisted dying or euthanasia. It allows eligible adults to request and receive assistance from a medical practitioner, whether that be a physician, a doctor, or a nurse practitioner, to end their life either through clinician-administered medication, that's euthanasia, or self-administered medication-assisted suicide. The program is governed primarily by the Federal Criminal Code with provincial/territorial implementation and oversight. So now we're going to look at its early history and prohibition. Canada's Criminal Code in 1882 prohibited aiding or abetting suicide and consent to the infliction of death. Attempted suicide was decriminalized in 1972, but assisting remained illegal. Now, in 1993, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled 5-4 in the Rodriguez versus British Columbia to uphold the prohibition. Sue Rodriguez, who had ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, had sought the right to assisted suicide. Now, multiple private members' bills to legalize assisted dying failed in Parliament over the decades. Quebec took a different path. Its National Assembly passed Bill 52, an act respecting end-of-life care, in 2014, which came into force in December 2015. This allowed, quote, medical aid in dying in the province by framing it as healthcare rather than criminal activity. It's the same thing with abortion, right? It's healthcare, apparently. No, it's not. Now, in the Carter versus Canada case, we had the initial legalization, 2015 and 2016. On February the 6th of 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada unanimously ruled in Carter versus Canada that the Criminal Code prohibitions on physician-assisted dying violated Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that is, life, liberty, and security of the person. The court found that competent adults with grievous and irremediable medical condition, medical condition causing enduring and intolerable suffering, had a constitutional right to seek assistance in dying. Right? It's a right to life, apparently. Life, liberty, and security of the person. So you kill him. Have the state kill you. It gave Parliament until June the 6th of 2016 to enact compliant legislation, with a short extension granted. In response, Parliament passed Bill C-14, an act to amend the Criminal Code to make related amendments to other acts, medical assistance in dying, which received royal assent on June the 17th of 2016. This created exemptions in the Criminal Code for MAiD. Now, key elements of the original 2016 law, often called Track 1 later, here's some key elements. Eligibility required a grievous and irremediable medical condition. That is, serious and incurable disease or illness, disease or disability, advanced state of irreversible decline, and intolerable physical or psychological suffering. Yeah, you have a right to life, but not a right to death. Yeah. Or the right to death here is really a right to life. Stupid. Now, natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. This is the original law. Safeguards included 2 independent assessments by medical practitioners, could be 2 doctors, a doctor or a nurse practitioner, a 10-day reflection period that was waivable, a voluntary informed consent, and a confirmation that the person had considered alternatives. So they had to look at every alternative before they could consider this, killing themselves. And this applied nationwide, though Quebec had already had its own framework. I mean, let's face it, Quebec is a nation within a nation. Really. French-speaking. So now we move forward now to 2019 through to 2021. And we had the expansion of MAiD through Bill C-7. And here, the reasonably foreseeable natural death, RFND, requirement was quickly challenged. You see the downward slope when you introduce something, right? It's a Hegelian dialectic, right? Was a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? So you create 2 extreme opposing views, and now you have a shift in paradigm, what is acceptable. Through the initial decriminalization of MAiD, really, or legalizing assistance in dying, as they call it, or assisted suicide, right? You have very strict criteria. But now we see the loosening of the once strict criteria. Now, I'm going to go on record. I'm anti-MAiD. Just like I'm an abolitionist. By the way, I'm not just pro-life, I'm an abolitionist. Killing your child should be criminalized. The physicians that perform abortions should be charged with murder, and the mothers who undergo the procedure should be charged with the same. And that's not a very popular view today. So moving forward here. So in September of 2019, the Quebec Superior Court and the Tribunal Procureur Général du Canada ruled that, sorry, Brad, if I'm butchering the French here, but who cares? Ruled that both the federal RFND criterion and Quebec's end-of-life criterion, listen to this, violated Charter Section 7 and 15. That 15 is equality for all, right? Actually, let me see if I can go there now. I'm going to go over here, and then I will... We'll go right to this. Yeah, so Charter 7 is life. This is it. Charter 7 rights here, right? Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice, right? Let's go to Charter 15 now. Okay, here's Charter 15. So Charter 15, 1, every individual is equal before and under the law, and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Section 2 says this. Section 1 does not preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups, including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. So that's Charter 7 and 15. The decision emphasized autonomy and dignity. The federal and Quebec governments did not appeal. This led to Bill C-7, an act to amend the Criminal Code, Medical Assistance in Dying, introduced in 2020 and receiving royal assent on March 17th of 2021. It significantly expanded access. You see now? By the way, we're going to see the downward slope where it'll become involuntary, where the government decides whether you die. And we're heading in that direction, folks. Right? So here, it removed the RFND requirement, right? Which was a reasonable, foreseeable, natural death requirement for eligibility, while retaining it to determine which set of safeguard applies. It created 2 tracks. Track 1, the RFND standard safeguards and timeless, most cases. And then you had the track 2, the non-foreseeable, like natural death, right? So stricter safeguards, including a minimum 90-day assessment period, requirements to discuss and ensure the person has seriously considered means to relieve suffering, and additional consultations if needed. It permitted a waiver of final consent in certain Track 1 cases where capacity loss was anticipated. It explicitly excluded mental illness as the sole underlying medical condition with a temporary sunset clause. Now, ongoing development since then. MAiD numbers grew rapidly after legalization. Right now, we're over 100,000, although those numbers haven't come out. And they're not reporting every MAiD death as a death by MAiD, by the way. So they're fudging the numbers. So MAiD numbers grew rapidly after legalization. According to Health Canada's 6th annual report covering 2024 data published in 2025, we don't have the 2025 data yet. 16,499 people received MAiD in 2024. That was up 6.9% from 2023. Now, the cumulative total since 2016, that doesn't include 2025, by the way, those numbers aren't out, is approximately 76,475 people have opted for MAiD. In 2024, this represented about 5% of all deaths in Canada. 95.6% were Track 1 and 4.4% were Track 2. Cancer was the most common condition, 63%, and the median age of recipients was about 77.9%. Most had access to palliative care. Now, the mental illness exclusion has been extended multiple times due to concerns about system readiness, assessing irremediability, distinguishing MAiD requests from suicidality, and the adequacy of mental health supports. Now, the original sunset, March of 2023, and this was extended by Bill C-39 in 2023 to March 2024, and then further extended by Bill C-62 to February 2024 to March the 17th, 2027. Right? So, by the way, March the 17th of 2027, if you have been diagnosed with a mental disorder, that can be as a sole condition. That's as a mental disorder. This can be now a condition or a sole condition for opting for MAiD, if you will. So moving forward, in February to June of 2026, the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying, MAiD, conducted a comprehensive review. Its June 2026 report recommended that the government amend the criminal code to indefinitely exclude persons whose sole underlying medical condition is mental illness from MAiD eligibility, citing persistent concerns about preparedness and safeguards. The report was not unanimous. As of July 2026, the government was reviewing the recommendation without further legislation. The exclusion would lift in March 2027. Other developments include Quebec Bill 11, 2023, which allows limited advance requests for MAiD, and ongoing debates about further possible expansions. Example of these would be mature minors or broader advance requests, which have not been implemented federally. Conscientious objection projections for practitioners exist, but implementation varies by province/territory. All right, so again, this is murder. This is murder. Now, Proverbs, let's go there for now. Assisted suicide or suicide in general is murder. Let me just go into the group chat here because I want to see everyone here. Amen. But 11 people watching tonight. Right here, Bible says, "And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood," by the way, that's killing yourself. "By man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man." Again, and the Bible also commands believers, right, really to deliver those who've been taken away to death, right? Really protecting life and advocating. Let's go to Proverbs 24 here. It's a good verse concerning this. All right, where are we here? 24. Verses 11 and 12. "If thou forbear to deliver them that are drawn unto death," right, "and those that are ready to be slain, if thou sayest, Behold, we knew it not, doth not he that pondereth the heart consider it? And he that keepeth thy soul, doth not he know it? And shall not he render to every man according to his work?" Right? "If thou forbear to deliver them that are drawn unto death." So instead of promoting, like physicians getting in there and promoting, well, that is, yeah, I agree with you, David, here. Mental disorders. Why? Because it can come up to a preacher like myself. I can now be diagnosed. I think there was that case out in BC there where that guy was pulled over, right? And at the request of a psychiatrist who deemed that he had a mental disorder and unfit. I can't remember the whole details behind that. But this is my concern with that. That as a Christian, as a pastor, I can be assessed or declared to have a mental disorder by a psychiatrist, right? And then obviously that would still at this point be voluntarily. But what if it moves to something called, what if it moves in the direction of being involuntary? By the way, we're moving there, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. So as believers, we have a responsibility to stand up and act on behalf of those who are oppressed and cannot help themselves, right? So really, we need to be preserving life. Just like that woman who's contemplating getting an abortion, right? She's had, in her eyes, an unwanted pregnancy through fornication, and you know, she's really of two minds, right? Really, it's our duty to step in there and convince her that no, you're killing that baby, and give her and lay it down what the Word of God says concerning this. And this is the same thing with MAiD. Someone who's considering this. No, your life is precious in God's eyes, and it's God's appointed time, right? It's God's appointed time. He appoints a time when you die, not you. Now here's other verses prohibiting killing. Ecclesiastes 8:8. Let's go there. There is no man that hath power over the spirit to retain the spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death. Right? Assisted suicide, he's got that power. God hasn't given them that power. That right. It's up to the state to determine this. God hasn't given you that right. Then we have the sanctity of life in general. Let's go to Psalm. Now, we use this for abortion. Oh, yeah. Psalms 139. Here. Start from verse 13 here. For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I preach these to the transgender queers, sodomites as well. They are fearfully and wonderfully made. So why would you want to change how God made you? But also those perhaps, they're at their end of their life, right? And the quality of life is not of the best quality, yet they are still fearfully and wonderfully made, right? So marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written. I believe this is DNA, by the way, which in continuance were fashioned when as yet there was none of them. None of them. Yeah. They'll claim that guilt from sin is a mental disorder. Yeah. I mean all of these possibilities. I do foresee that, by the way, David. And this is something I've been preaching. I do foresee this, this coming in this country of Canada, especially. It's certainly being fast tracked here. Now, the term death with dignity is an immense deception. Every individual, every single person, regardless of ability, has dignity. And dignity is something God has given you, right? You don't lose it. And you don't need to die to have or retain it either. Now, I'm going to go to a few articles here. One of them is entitled The Cautionary Tale of Euthanasia in Canada. Let me just go to our... All right, let me just make this a little bit bigger. Hoppa. All right, here. Cautionary Tale, right, by Levi Minderhout and Daniel Zekfeld. As euthanasia become... Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. You know what? Let me just go here. Over here. All right. There we are. All right, let's go. As euthanasia becomes more prevalent in Canada, death is increasingly seen as an escape from suffering. Well, you know what? Really, this is like heaven on earth, right? For those who are not in Christ. And by the way, if you're opting for major loss, every single person that opts for assisted suicide, right, MAiD, every single one of those people that opted for it died in their sins and went to hell. Every single one died in their sins and went to hell. And they didn't escape suffering. They only entered into suffering. Suffering that we cannot comprehend. It's incomprehensible, really. I mean, for them, the suffering only began. They may have been dying of cancer. Their body may have been filled with cancer. They might have been on all kinds of pain medication. Right, and really, in terms of physically suffering because of illness and that, but that's nothing in comparison to what they're experiencing in hell right now. And by the way, the whole process of MAiD as a medical procedure, quote unquote, is anything but compassion and killing, if you will, or compassion and dying, I should say, but it's killing. But they call it compassion and dying. So the Canadian approach to euthanasia and assisted suicide, euphemistically known as medical assistance in dying, has expanded in recent years and has sparked significant debate about its ethical and societal implications. Euthanasia was first intended only for those nearing the end of their lives. See, that was first. But we know once once you open up this Pandora's box, anything happens, right? And this is what's happened, right? So once they decriminalized it, that opens the door for everything else. This is why with Bill C-9 and removing the good faith clause opens the door for Christian persecution, criminalizing the word of God. And I don't care what anyone says. Technically, the word of God is not illegal. It's not been criminalized, but that door is open. It's the same thing. It opens that door. The safeguards are removed, and that door is now firmly open. We need safeguards. We need parameters. So now Canada has one of the most permissive euthanasia policies in the world, revealing a rapidly increasing culture of not just accepting death, but actively promoting it. We live in a death culture. We've embraced a death culture. And this is what happens when a nation has turned its back on God. Let's go to what David said here. Let's go to Psalm 9 and verse 17. Right? The wicked shall be turned in hell, and all the nations that forget God. So when we embrace euthanasia, the killing of people under the guise of compassion and dying, right? Or a physician or a nurse practitioner administers a few injections, right? Thus killing the patient, right? We're a nation that's forgotten God. That's what happens when you throw out the word of God. When you throw out the word of God, right, and you treat it as any book with disdain and irreverence, then you know what? Anything goes. There's no sanctity in life. This is why you can have a bunch of Jezebel feminists out in the streets, literally throwing things and literally throwing things that are a sign, literally spilling whatever, tomato sauce, whatever they've done to us, that are signs because they love death. They love killing babies. They have that inordinate affection. An ordinate affection is a woman, especially particularly a married woman, but even a woman, there's any woman who desires to get married and have children. That's an inordinate affection. So let's get back to our article here. Veterans have called the Ministry of Veterans Affairs looking for help and been offered euthanasia instead. MAiD. Those with suicidal ideation have gone to the hospital for help, only to be encouraged to consider euthanasia, killing themselves. By the way, I need to send something over here. I had another, let me just move that over. I'm going to airdrop something here. Okay, we're going to go back to our, where am I here? Cautionary tale. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Yeah. That's not what I wanted. Just give me a moment. Here it is. That's what I wanted. Wrong website. That's what I'm going to go over this too. Because some of this stuff is going to blow you away. All right. I'm going to go back here though. Let me go back to our amen. Yeah, that's right, Brad. Salsa and who knows what else too. By the way, that was the Lord's hand that they missed you and got it all over the sign. So the signs act as a shield as well. Only be considered euthanasia. A woman was even asked if she was aware of the option of euthanasia before going into cancer-removing surgery. So Canada is increasingly standing as a warning to other countries about the consequences of legalizing euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now we look at the slippery slope here. MAiD was first legalized in 2016, as I previously mentioned, for Canadians whose death was reasonably foreseeable. At the time, a person had to have a grievous and irremediable medical condition which caused enduring physical or psychological suffering to qualify for euthanasia. Think of someone with a terminal cancer prognosis. In 2021, just 5 years after legalization, MAiD was expanded to include those whose death is not reasonably foreseeable. With this expansion, people with disabilities or non-terminal illnesses could choose to have doctors end their life, or a doctor end their life, right? So think of someone who is in a wheelchair or is wheelchair bound. You see the downward slope. Oh yeah, the gravy. I don't remember, brother. You remember them better than me. We've had so many situations of having stuff thrown at us that we don't. I can't even keep track of it all. Now, the next expansion has already been passed into law, but implementation has been delayed until March the 17th, 2027. And now listen to this. This would allow Canadians suffering solely from a mental illness to be eligible for euthanasia. That is a steep downward slope. That's jumping off a cliff here. Now think of someone suffering from depression, right? Now, since legalization, the number of euthanasia deaths in Canada has steadily grown every year, and showed little sign of slowing down. Between 2016 and 2023, 60,000 Canadians have been euthanized, with over 15,000 in 2023 alone. Now, euthanasia now accounts for 4.7% of all deaths in the country, a rate second only to the Netherlands. Euthanasia is now the 5th most common cause of death in Canada. Now, compare these numbers with Oregon, right? Let's see what it says here. Let's go. I'm going to compare it. I don't think I'm going to go through all of that. Let's go back. Of course, Oregon and other American states only permits assisted suicide where a doctor gives the patient the means to end their own life. So they give them the means and then the patient does it themselves. In Canada, assisted suicide is permitted, but nearly non-existent. Instead, MAiD deaths are almost exclusively due to euthanasia, where a doctor actively ends a patient's life. In fact, in 2023, over 5,300 euthanasia deaths were done by just 89 medical practitioners, an average of 60 deaths each in just 1 year. Some Canadian doctors have become experts in killing, with one doctor administering fatal substances to over 40 patients. Let's open that. I want to open that this link here. I think this lady here, doesn't she look sweet? This doctor helped more than 400 patients. This is a real wicked woman. I want to see if we can get the video of her. Yeah, okay. Let's just bypass those ads.
And you could win big in the 100K nightly draw. One ticket, 2 chances to win big with OLG's Powerball.
Yeah, if we can get past these ads here. There's 2 ads and then it goes to the. All right. I just have to wait for the ads to expire. What's this Protect Ontario? Whenever it says
work in tragedy all the time, right? You know, my whole career has been being with tragedies, right? When somebody gets the diagnosis of cancer, when somebody gets the diagnosis of a chronic illness,
I'm just going to leave that night. You can see
multiple sclerosis. I mean, it's just one tragedy after another. And why do we?
This woman is devil
want to be
possessed.
doctors? Why do we want to care for people who are suffering tragedies? Because
this doctor alone has been responsible for 400 MAiD deaths.
Why we get good.
She's murdered she's helped murder
doctors love
400 quote-unquote patients.
These people are the most grateful that I have ever cared for.
Look at that devilish laugh.
So that's certainly part of it, that just, they just, I just get so many thank yous and so many hugs. And I've been a family doctor
Did they hug
for
you
a
after?
long time. I graduated back from medical school back in 1975.
Yeah, did they hug you after?
And I wanted to be a full service doctor,
exactly.
cradle to
Do
grave,
no harm.
with
violation
a
of their
focus
Hippocratic
on
oath.
women's health, which I did. Then in 2015, when we knew that the law was changing, I just happened to be having a coffee with a research colleague who works in palliative care, and I said, our law is changing next year. Are you going to be providing, we didn't call it MAiD then, the assisted deaths? And she said, oh no, our palliative care organization is completely separating themselves from...
Anyway, I don't want to listen to all those ads, but you get the point there with this woman here. What a devil. So she's admitted to administering fatal substances to over 400 patients. Now, Canada now effectively allows suicide on demand. You can wait 6 to 8 months for a heart operation, open heart surgery, whatever. Right, you're on a huge list, right? But I can walk in and opt for MAiD, right? And you get it the next day. Okay, so it allows suicide on demand. While patients may be euthanized due to a specific reason for eligibility, such as illnesses or disability, it has become clear that some are also requesting and receiving death due to social, economic, or mental suffering. Now here it says a Christian perspective on suffering. Suffering is usually behind a request for euthanasia. The most commonly cited reasons for euthanasia requests are the loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities, over 95%, or to perform activities of daily living, over 83%. Just under 60% cite inadequate pain control or fear of it. Over 20% cite isolation and loneliness, and for those not nearing death, the number was nearly 50%. Nearly half note that they feel like a burden on family, friends, or caregivers. Now, as Christians, we understand that suffering is real on this side of glory. Pain, disease, disability, and mental illness all point to the effects of sin on our world and the need for the world to be renewed. Death itself, really, to be born again, really. Death itself is referred to by the Apostle Paul as the last enemy that will be destroyed. That's right. But we also know that suffering builds us up in ways we cannot see. It also refines us as well. As we read in James 1:12, I'm going to read James 1:12 in our King James Bible, because I'm not quoting the King James here, and I will not quote a modern version, even in an article. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. Right? Let's move over here. So that's what they quote there. But even physical, I think a better verse to me would be this. The Apostle Paul, than what they've quoted there. Let's go down here. All right, so verse 7 here. Unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, listen to this, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. By the way, if you're in palliative care, God's strength is made perfect in your weakness. His grace is sufficient, all sufficient, even in that moment, in that predicament. Nothing has changed. Weird, what happened? Did I lose? It crashed on me. Just give me a sec, folks. Sometimes it crashes. All right. Most gladly, therefore, will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, right? He goes on here, and reproaches and necessities and persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Amen. And really, that's the Bible approach to this, right? Where are we here? Okay, so he reads the quote. So we may not know the purpose of suffering, he says here, but we can respond to suffering by remaining faithful and giving glory to God. Amen. Further suffering is an opportunity for care. Stephanie Gray Connors writes in her book, Start With What? Every person in some way is suffering, and with that reality comes all kinds of opportunities to unleash love. Continues here. Suffering allows us to care for each other and to be cared for. It is a reminder that we are not in control of our own lives, but reliant first on God and then on those around us. By the way, our lives are in the Lord's hands. And yet in Canada today, death is increasingly seen as a solution to suffering. Rather than being the enemy, death is seen as an ally. Right? And yet in Canada today, death is increasingly seen as a solution to suffering, right? And as an ally. Seeking death as a solution to suffering is a very short-sighted perspective. Paul in Romans 8 speaks again to the question of human suffering. Right, I'm not going to go. He talks about the verses here. Let's go. I think it's 8:22. Let me just go into that. Yeah. I don't like quoting modern versions. I just will not do that, even in an article. I think he's quoting here, because the creature itself shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now, right? And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. By the way, this is another case against suicide. Yeah, she had the face of a killer, absolutely. She was devil-possessed, and she certainly had that look to her. So when face to face with sufferings, Christians look forward not to quick death, but to everlasting life. Right? We also look forward to the resurrection of this corruptible vessel that right now we're living in. Right? We're looking forward to that day. Now, Christian understanding of human dignity. The third most commonly cited reason behind the euthanasia request was the loss of dignity. Loss of dignity or loss of ability is real fear for Christians as well. ALS, by the way, there's no loss of dignity. There's loss of ability perhaps, but not loss of dignity. ALS, multiple sclerosis, cancer, other diseases can devastate bodies and make people entirely reliant on others. As our culture has embraced death for suffering, dying with dignity has come to mean ending life before one comes too disabled or dependent on others. Nearly 65% of people euthanized in Canada cited loss of dignity as a source of suffering behind their request to die. But as Christians, we know that dignity is not found in one's ability, health, or disposition. We know that every person has dignity simply by the fact that human beings are made in the image of God. Continues here. Professor Richard Weikart in his book Unnatural Death writes, quote, offering people an easy way to end their lives does not let them die with dignity. Superficially, it may seem compassionate to some. However, in reality, it tells them they are no longer worth helping, that they are nothing but the sum of their aches and pains, their fears, and their despair. A society ceases to recognize innate human dignity at their peril. Canada's initial euthanasia law is based on the arbitrary idea that some human beings have dignity and some do not. right? It is based on the idea that some lives are worth living and some are not. Sound familiar, right? And you can see where this is leading to. The growth of euthanasia since 2016 in Canada has demonstrated the serious problems with that approach, adding more and more people to the category of life not worth living. Dependence is not necessarily a bad thing. We are dependent on the true vine of life and are created to rely on others. The Christian call to care for the vulnerable, right? They quote Proverbs 24, verses 11 and 12, which we quoted earlier, right? Speaks to how Christians should confront the specter of euthanasia. In that passage, of course, we are called to deliver, right? Those, right there. I'm not going to read all of this. Now, we are called to deliver those who are considering or being encouraged to end their lives. And Christians ought to do this by caring for those who are suffering. Underlying every desire or request to die is a request, listen to this, is a request for help. Even that woman who is pregnant, confused, right? And we understand she sinned, she fornicated, in most cases, right? Often that is a request for help, right? In some cases, I understand now that their conscience is so seared that they're so selfish that they want to, it's an inconvenience. I understand that as well. So one woman who was euthanized in 2021 wrote before her death, quote, "I think if more people cared for me, I might be able to handle the suffering caused by my physical illnesses alone. Many today suffer without a church community, without a caring family, and perhaps without friends. The church has a responsibility to care for those who are suffering and to emphasize the dignity of human life in all circumstances. We are called to love and care for our neighbors at a very personal level, and ultimately suffering people need the help of the gospel to know the one who gives the true meaning and purpose of life. Jesus said, I came that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. I didn't say I came that they might choose death, that they might have life and have it more abundantly. But Christians also need to be involved at the political level in Canada, the United States, and around the world. By the way, I believe this. We cannot pretend that some form of euthanasia or assisted suicide is not legal in parts of our country or ignores calls for the legalization of euthanasia. By the way, I have no problem with more Christians running for office. I have no problem with that. We must speak out when a government that allows assisted suicide or euthanasia endorses the idea that some lives are worth living and some lives are not worth living. Instead of healthcare that seeks to promote and preserve life, it crosses the line into ending life and providing death. Christians must continue to promote life-affirming care for everyone through personal care for the suffering and by advocating for life-affirming care on a broader scale. I agree with that. By the way, I'm going to deal with this whole idea, right? Instead of healthcare that seeks to promote and preserve life, crosses the line into ending life. I'm going to deal with the burden on our universal taxpayer-funded healthcare or death care system. And there's a direct correlation here. Certainly with an aging population. Now I want to go to this article because this article now provides some other points I haven't addressed that the previous article hasn't addressed. And by the way, we're going to go to this report here, right? I'm going to go to this report. It's 95, we're going to go on record here, 95.6% of all MAiD deaths to date have been white Caucasians. Did you hear that? White people, white Caucasians, not black people, not First Nation Native Indians, right? Indigenous, not those from India, not Muslims from the Middle East, white Caucasians, Canadians, white Canadians. If I've emphasized that point enough, white. Anyway, this article here is entitled MAiD in Canada: The Rise of Medical Assistance in Dying and Its Impact on White Canadians by Gunnar Alfredson. Now, again, some of this I'm going to repeat from the previous article. In Canada, or these points, I should say, euthanasia, euphemistically termed medical assistance in dying, has become legally sanctioned end-of-life. Has become a legally sanctioned end-of-life option since its introduction in 2016. It became law on July the 17th of 2016. This program allows eligible individuals suffering from grievous medical conditions to request assistance from healthcare providers to end their own lives. Right? Either through clinician-administered drugs or self-administered prescriptions. Most of it has been this. I think it was like 96%. While proponents hail it as a compassionate choice promoting autonomy and dignity, critics argue it raises ethical concerns, particularly regarding its disproportionate application among certain demographics. Notably, official data reveals that MAiD predominantly results in the deaths of white, W-H-I-T-E, Canadians. Am I emphasizing a point here? Am I making my point? The path to legalizing MAiD began with a Supreme Court order of Canada decision in 2000. Now I'm going to go through some of this that we've already covered. Again, the ruling argued that the ban violated the individual's right to life, liberty, and security of person. Right? In the past, in June, okay, we're going to pass by all of this. And we know what the eligibility, right, was limited to those adults whose death was reasonably foreseeable. Right, had safeguards with 2 independent medical assessments and a 10-day reflection period and informed consent, right? And of course, it was expanded in March of 2021 with Bill C-7 following a Quebec Superior Court ruling, right, that deemed the reasonably foreseeable criterion discriminatory. And this introduced 2 tracks. Track 1 for those whose death is foreseeable, with streamlined safeguards, and track 2 for others with irremediable conditions requiring a 90-day assessment period and expertise in the patient's condition. Further expansions have been debated, including delays in extending MAiD to those with mental illness as the sole underlying condition until March of 2027. And this expansion into the mental health domain constitutes a marked expansion of MAiD eligibility criteria. Presumably, people diagnosed with depression or anxiety will be eligible to end their own lives relatively soon. And by the way, folks, this will lead to involuntary eligibility, involuntary MAiD, where the doctor decides, the physician decides, that this nurse practitioner decides whether you live or you die. This is where we're going. And by the way, I'm going to play a couple of short videos for you on that as well. Right? MAiD is administered by physicians or nurse practitioners with 2 methods: direct administration, euthanasia, or provision of self-administered substance-assisted suicide. By 2024, MAiD accounted for over 4% of all deaths in Canada, with numbers rising steadily from 1,015 in 2016, obviously that accounted for half the year, to 16,499 in 2024. Again, the 2025 numbers have not been released. And there's been a number of reports stating that they're listing other conditions as a cause of death rather than MAiD. So to access MAiD, individuals must be at least 18, eligible for publicly funded health care, have a grievous and irremediable medical condition causing enduring suffering, making voluntary requests, and provide informed consent. Conditions like cancer, the most common at 64% in 2023, cardiovascular diseases and neurological disorders dominate the requests. Unlike some jurisdictions, mental illness is not yet required, broadening eligibility to include chronic disabilities. The process involves a written request, assessment by 2 practitioners, and the procedural safeguards to prevent coercion. However, concerns persist about vulnerabilities such as poverty or inadequate support services influencing decisions. For instance, some cases have involved individuals citing housing instability or financial hardship as factors. Right? Right. So since legalization, over 60,000 Canadians have died via MAiD. I think as of the end of 2024, it was 76,500 approximately. Some reckon right now it's over 25,000 as we speak. So 6 annual reports on medical assistance in dying 2012 from Health Canada details the provisions. Let's go to that, by the way. I'll read some of this and then we'll go to it. So 14,499 provisions, 7.5% increase from 2023. This makes MAiD the 5th leading cause of death in Canada, surpassing some traditional categories like accidents. Demographic breakdowns reveal real patterns. Median age is around 78%, with slightly more men, 50.8%, than women being killed. Urban residents and those with higher education or income levels are overrepresented as well. The most striking statistic is racial. In 2024, 95% of the 15,927 respondents identified as Caucasian white, far exceeding the general population. Canada's overall population is approximately 70% white and falling. I think it's more than that now. Right? And this trend upholds from previous years, 95.8% in 2023, and consistently around 96% since the program began. MAiD's role in causing the deaths of white people is evident in the data, with whites comprising 95 to 96% of recipients. The program actively ends the lives of thousands of white Canadians annually, over 15,000 in 2024 alone. This proportion is not fully explained by demographics. While Canada's older population is whiter, 86% of those 65% plus in 2021. MAiD's white recipient rate exceeds even age-adjusted expectations. Some researchers note that whites may have better access to healthcare, leading to higher awareness and utilization. I call baloney. We have universal healthcare. Anyone can walk into a hospital or a doctor's office and request this. Obviously, they have to meet still some criteria, of course. So the survey shows MAiD supporters are often older, wealthier, educated, and white, correlating with higher approval rates. There are also a bunch of Marxists, too. The fact that whites are being euthanized at a higher rate than other groups is an indication of white privilege, quote unquote. According to the official narrative as articulated by the government of Canada, non-whites or racialized, quote unquote, groups such as Indigenous, basically if you're non-white, you're a racialized group. My asthma is acting up. I've got a little bit of wheezing. Groups such as Indigenous peoples, 0.6% to 1% of recipients, and other facing systemic barriers like racism or poverty are examples of underrepresentation. By the way, most in poverty are white now, too. One analysis entitled Euthanized White highlights, let's see this. I want to just click on that. Oh yeah, this one here. I had this report here. I want to read that, by the way, as well. Highlights that even accounting for age, the 96% figure indicates a tilt towards the privileged group. Institutional deaths, hospices show similar patterns, with whites dominating subtotals across provinces. It is a privilege to be put to death, apparently. White privilege. Now, this emphasis on white deaths raises questions about whether MAiD inadvertently targets or is preferentially used against whites. High death rates amongst the white populace combined with increased population replacement immigration points to a wider genocidal scheme. You hear that? White population represents Western society. It's indicative of, quote unquote, a white Christianized Western society that must be dismantled, must be destroyed to usher in the New World Order. So high death rate amongst the white populace combined with increased population replacement immigration points to a wider genocidal theme. A notable video clip features Dr. Madeline Lee, a psychiatrist and advocate for expanding MAiD to mental illnesses, who is a fellow of the Trudeau Foundation. In the footage shared widely on social media, she states, people getting MAiD are actually very privileged. They're white. They're well off. I won't go to that video clip. This overt acknowledgement comes during a discussion on MAiD's demographics and expansion. The video from a panel or interview context explains the clip's relevance. Lee admits that MAiD recipients are predominantly privileged white individuals aligning with Health Canada data. And I'm going to go to some of that data, by the way, to back up what's being claimed in this article. As a key figure in MAiD advocacy and linked to government-affiliated bodies, her statement provides evidence of recognition at high levels that MAiD is being used on white, W-H-I-T-E people with privilege, quote-unquote. Critics interpret this as an implicit admission of the program's focus, though Lee frames it in the context of access disparities. The clip sparked controversy with over 297,000 views and discussions on platforms like X, highlighting concerns about the program's true intent. So I want to go through some of this. This is from the Government of Canada, by the way, official. Highlights. I'm going to read some of the highlights here. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can you see it clearly? Because I can make it bigger, the view here for you. Well, maybe I can't. It won't allow me to. Opa. Oh, yeah, there we are. Can you see it better? So medical assistance in dying is a health service delivered by provincial and territorial health systems as part of end-of-life care. Within the federal legal framework that sets out strict criteria. Like it obviously tells you it's been allowed in Canada since 2016 when the Parliament of Canada passed. Okay, we're going to move past this. The 6th annual report provides a summary of MAiD requests, assessments, and provisions across Canada for 2024 calendar year. This information is provided to Health Canada by provincial and territorial health officials, as well as by physicians, nurse practitioners, pharmacists, and pharmacy technicians. The 6th annual report marks the second full year of data collection under the amended regulations for the monitoring of medical assistance in dying, which came into force on January the 1st, 2023. The report provides important insight into who requests and receives MAiD and how it is delivered. While data quality and comprehensiveness is improving, there are still important data limitations to consider. The ability to present trends over time is limited, as is the quality and reliability of self-identification measures on race, Indigenous identity, and disability. Now listen to this. While the total number of MAiD provisions increased in 2024, the rate of growth decreased substantially, consistent with the trend from 2023. The report details 22,535 reports of MAiD requests that Health Canada received in 2024. A total of 16,499 people received MAiD. The remaining cases were requests that did not result in a MAiD provision. 4,017 died of another cause. 1,327 individuals were deemed ineligible, and 692 individuals withdrew the request. The annual rate of growth and in the number of MAiD provisions has decreased significantly over the past several years, from 36.8% between 2019 and 2020 to 6.9% between 2023 and 2024. These findings seem to suggest that the number of MAiD provisions is beginning to stabilize. However, it will take several more years before long-term trends can be conclusively identified. Listen to this. The vast majority of people receiving MAiD in 2024 had reasonably foreseeable death. So a person whose death is reasonably foreseeable, that is, they are close to death, is referred to as Track 1. These made up 95.6% of MAiD provisions. Track 2 refers to recipients who are assessed as not having a natural death, as having a natural death, not reasonably foreseeable. These made up a small minority of 4.4%. Now we're going to look at the section here because it's consistent with 2023 findings. Those who received MAiD under track 1 were older and more likely to have cancer as an underlying condition. Right, so the median age of individuals receiving MAiD under track 1 was 78 years. Right, 60.9% were 75 years of age or over. A slight greater percentage were men, 52.2%, 47.8% were women. Cancer was the most frequently reported underlying medical condition cited in 63.6% cases. Now, consistent with 2023 findings, right, those receiving MAiD under track 2 were predominantly women, slightly younger, and lived with their illnesses for a much longer period of time. Here, the median age was 75.9%, and 53.5% were over the age of 75. A greater percentage were women, 56.7%, while 43.7% were men. This represents a small narrowing of the gap between women and men when compared to 2023, right, when 58.5% were women and 41.5% were men. This is also consistent with overall population health trends where women are more likely to experience long-term chronic illness, which can cause suffering, but would not typically make a person's death foreseeably or reasonably foreseeable. People assessed under track 2 lived longer with a serious and incurable condition than those assessed under track 1. It gives other percentages. I'm not going to go to everything here. Now, the number of people assessed as being ineligible in 2024 was proportionally higher than track 2, right? And I'm not going to go there. You can read these percentages here. More people in 2024 who received MAiD responded to self-identification requests on race and indigenous identity, but findings are still subject to limitations. A total of 15,927 people who received MAiD responded to the question on racial, ethnic, or cultural identity. The vast majority, 95.6%, identified as Caucasian white. Did you hear that? This is from the Government of Canada's own numbers, right? The second most commonly reported racial, ethnic, or cultural identity was East Asian at 1.6%. That's a big difference. These percentages are close to those reported for 2023, 95.8% Caucasian, 1.8% East Asian. A total of 16,150 people who received MAiD in 2024 responded to the question on indigenous identity. 102 people self-identified as First Nations, 57% self-identified as Métis, and 7 people self-identified as Inuit. As provinces and territories have varied approaches to collecting information on these questions, individuals may be reluctant to self-identify. Conclusions on the basis of these data alone are limited. So here we go, all these numbers. I'm not going to go to everything here, but you get the idea. All right, so we're going to go back to this article here. While MAiD is praised in some circles as receiving suffering, its emphasis on causing white deaths has fueled debate. Some view it as a slippery slope with expansions potentially targeting vulnerable whites further. In official government sources, the ethical concerns that are emphasized are whether white privilege enables easier access to MAiD, leading to more white deaths. Yes, the Government of Canada believes it is a privilege to be put out of your own misery. As Canada imports more non-white migrants, while MAiD grows, some quite rightly speculate about demographic engineering and anti-white replacement. MAiD represents a profound departure from ethical end-of-life care, with 95 to 96% of recipients being white. MAiD epitomizes anti-white, dysgenic, and genocidal nature of a modern multicultural state. And I agree with that. No thanks. So here's euthanized while white. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so I can read it. Whites made up 96% of euthanized Canadians in 2024. I couldn't believe it. Yes, euthanasia mostly involves seniors and older Canadians and older Canadians are whiter. But the 65 plus bracket was only 86% white at the last census in 2021. You know what? I want to go down here. I want to go back to this, because this is kind of important. Health Canada replicated the socioeconomic and community analysis done in the 5th annual report and did an analysis on remoteness to continue to better understand the circumstances of people receiving MAiD, which resulted in similar findings. Findings from socioeconomic and community analysis suggested a high level that people who receive MAiD do not disproportionately come from lower income. I want to move past this. I want to. There's something on burden to the healthcare system in this. Anyway, I'll come back if I cannot find it. But the 65 plus age bracket was only 86% white at the last census in 2021 and is less so today. I looked up the latest report on medical assistance in dying in Canada. Here's the relevant paragraph. Quote, total of 15,927 of the 16,499 people who received MAiD in 2024 responded to this question, the vast majority of whom, 95.6%, identified as Caucasian, that is white. For context and how this compares to the overall population of Canada, approximately 70% of the people in Canada identified as Caucasian in the most recent census. I think that number is much lower because since then we've imported over 5 million Indians from India. Why are Euro-Canadians over-euthanized? Let me answer by examining how their risk of euthanasia varies by medical justification and place of death. Why is the risk higher when natural death isn't near? Why is it higher when the recipient in an institution rather than at home? When the recipient is in an institution rather than at home? And why is it higher in certain provinces than others when natural death is near versus when it isn't here? So a request for MAiD follows one of two tracks. We go through all of this, right? Track 2 deaths also had a lower median age of 75.9, even though younger seniors tend to be less white. Euro-Canadians are thus over-euthanized for reasons that run counter to the natural processes of aging and illness. The former preconditions for MAiD. Whiteness matters less when the decision is to hasten the natural death. It seems to matter more when the decision is to hasten death independently of medical justification. So who is making whiteness a risk factor? Those who request euthanasia or those who approve the request? Good question. Are whites more likely to request MAiD? Let's begin with requesters. Euro-Canadians are more individualistic than other Canadians. They are more likely to live on their own after retirement, with neither a spouse nor children to help, so they may be less motivated to continue living regardless of their medical condition. Euro-Canadians may also feel alienated in the country that scarcely resembles the one of their youth. This is a key statement. I can tell you right now, I'm going to go on air, I feel right now, as a white Jewish Canadian male, born again Christian male, that I feel a stranger in the very country I live in. I feel like I'm a foreigner in this country right now, especially in the big city. It's like literally I'm a foreigner. Now, this factor, like the preceding one, would matter more in MAiD requests when death isn't near. Are the requests more readily approved? But good question. A MAiD request must be approved by two medical professionals. Approval once granted is not reviewed by anyone else. The medical professionals can have personal biases like anyone, and such biases are less constrained if MAiD approval isn't reviewed or requires no medical evidence. What if the two doctors are Muslim? Right? Think about that. Personal biases may include resentment against Euro-Canadians for past or present discrimination, or for banal reasons like a dispute with a neighbor. For that matter, a personal bias might harm Euro-Canadians without specifically targeting them. It could simply be a more favorable attitude toward one's in-group. For instance, a physician may be more willing to sit down and discuss alternatives to MAiD if the requester comes from the same culture, shares the same religion, and is perhaps a relative. This is less likely if the two people come from different backgrounds. The request will then be more readily approved, not out of animosity, but because the physician has less time or ability to talk the requester out of it. If both are Euro-Canadians, the physician may insist on treating all requesters equally, or even overcompensate by showing more concern for those of a different culture. This desire to talk the requester out of it can vary from one situation to another and from one province to another, as we will see. It is especially critical when time is limited and the physician must choose between talking with the current patient or moving on to the next one. Keep in mind that primary care physicians see about 100 patients a week and are always under pressure to keep their caseload at a manageable level. If the desire to dissuade isn't strong enough, approval will inevitably be granted for reasons of convenience. Trudeau Lemons 2025 documents the case of a man diagnosed with Alzheimer's, feared he would end up in long-term care. He signed a waiver of final consent for MAiD that would take effect in 3.5 years, subject to certain preconditions: difficulty eating or swallowing, bodily tremors, inability to verbally communicate, etc. Less than a year later, he was hospitalized after a fall and became delirious. During a period of cognitive improvement, he was deemed capable of consent and given a lethal injection. His previous wishes, as stated in his initial consent, were ignored. The system invites abuse because a wrongly euthanized person cannot lodge a complaint. The complaint must come from a surviving family member, and this is where the individualism of Euro-Canadians may play a role. If a physician has a heavy caseload who is easier to unload, someone with ties to many relatives or someone with none, right? Death in an institution versus death at home. Table C5 of the above report provides a breakdown of MAiD deaths by ethnicity and province or territory, right? This is from the Health Canada report, page 85, that I showed you here. We previously saw a national total of 15,226 deaths among whites or Caucasians. Yet, if we add up the provincial and territorial subtotals, we now get a total of 14,215 deaths among whites. The second total is 6.6% lower. It isn't unusual for death statistics to show a discrepancy between the national total and a combined regional total. The discrepancy arises because the form filler is unsure what to write for the deceased's address and leaves the field blank. Yes, the province of death can be inferred from other fields and even from the form itself, but such inference requires manual intervention when the forms are processed. While the address is seldom left blank on a death certificate filled out at the deceased's home, either a private residence or retirement home, it is often when the certificate is filled out at an institution such as a hospice, hospital, or palliative care facility, residential care facility, correctional facility, or shelter. Institutions account for 10.5% of Track 1 deaths and 18.4% of Track 2 deaths. If missing addresses explain the discrepancy between the national total and the combined provincial total, we can infer that the address field was left blank in about half of institutional MAiD deaths. This discrepancy reveals another. Whites are 95.6% of the national total, but only 86.2% of the combined provincial/territorial total. If the second total does not exclude many institutional deaths, we can infer that Euro-Canadians are more at risk of euthanasia in an institutional setting. A gap of 9.4% points separates the white share of institutional MAiD deaths from the white share of at-home MAiD deaths. A gap almost equal to the one between the white share of MAiD deaths and the white share of Canada's senior population. The higher risk of euthanasia for whites seems to be confined almost entirely to those individual deaths where the form filler did not bother to fill in the address field. Are the addresses of Euro-Canadians hard to look up? Now, we return to this point. For now, we will let us use the provincial totals while remembering that they understate the white overrepresentation in MAiD deaths. This understatement should, if anything, reduce the differences between provinces in white overrepresentation, making them seem smaller than they really are. White provinces versus less white one. Canada's 10 provinces differ linguistically, politically, and ethnically. Quebec stands out not only as overwhelmingly French-speaking province, but also as a highly secular one where public policy is no longer shaped by the Catholic Church or even Christianity in general. The provinces also differ in ethnic makeup. Canada's population was about 97.7% European descent in 1961. But this percentage has fallen since the shift to global immigration in the 1960s, particularly in British Columbia and Ontario, where most non-European immigrants have settled. In contrast, Quebec and Atlantic provinces have received much less immigration and are now the whitest areas of Canada. And also, they're also the most liberal areas of Canada, the most Marxist areas of Canada. Do these provincial differences have any bearing on MAiD deaths? Are whites more overrepresented in some provinces than in others? We can answer this question by comparing the white percentage of MAiD deaths in each province with the white percentage of the senior population. The following table shows how much whites are over-euthanized by each province. White MAiD deaths in Ontario, 90.4%. Percentage of whites over 65 or 78.6%. 78.8%. That's white overrepresentation. So look at this title. Look at this table here. 11.6% increase. British Columbia, right? So here a little bit less. White 76%. Saskatchewan 95. Over 65, 84.6%. Manitoba now 86.6%. Over 84.5% are over 65. New Brunswick 97.2% white. 96.6% were over 65. Of course, very similar thing in Alberta, the percentage is lower. 82.5% white, over 65 were white. So MAiD deaths were not whiter than the 65% bracket in the Atlantic provinces. Quebec and Alberta, white Atlantic provinces, Quebec and Alberta. But they were very much so in Ontario, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. The same pattern appears if we compare the white share of MAiD deaths with the white share of the general population. Euro-Canadians are more likely to be euthanized in those provinces where they are proportionately fewer, except for Alberta. Its demographics are like Ontario's, yet the two are poles apart in terms of white overrepresentation in MAiD deaths. That's probably because the white population is more conservative in Alberta. As with Track 1/Track 2 differences, these interprovincial differences may be due either to the requester or the physician approving the request. So the question is asked here, are whites less likely to request MAiD in whiter provinces? Euro-Canadian culture may be less individualistic in whiter provinces. Poorer provinces attract fewer immigrants and thus tend to be whiter, more traditional, and more culturally resistant to market forces. Their residents prefer to stay near relatives in a stable community rather than move elsewhere for a better paying job. Quebecois also wish to preserve the French language and culture even though the result is slower growth. In such provinces, older Euro-Canadians receive more emotional and material support from other family members and the community at large. These factors may explain why Euro-Canadians are less likely to seek euthanasia in some provinces than others. Again, Alberta is an exception. Its demographics are like Ontario, 66.5% white versus 62.9% in white in 2021. It is also one of the provinces with the fewest locally born residences, only 52%, yet it is also the province where whites are the least likely to be euthanized compared to other groups. Are they more religious? Actually, self-identified Christians are less common in Alberta than in the country as a whole. I didn't realize that, by the way. And other measures portray the province as average in terms of religiosity. Now, Quebec is another exception. It is a province where whites are the second least likely to be euthanized compared to other groups. It is also the least religious province by any measure, with the lowest percentage of people participating in group religious activities at least once a month. Something else seems to explain the province, the Alberta and Quebec exceptions. Both may simply be less woke. They have not gone as far as other provinces in normalizing anti-white thinking, discourse, and behavior. We return to this point. Are requests from whites less readily approved in whiter provinces? In whiter, more traditional provinces, Euro-Canadians may encounter more pushback during the MAiD approval process because their physicians are more often of the same cultural background. Although we lack provincial data on physicians by country of birth, we can use a percentage of Canadian-educated physicians as a rough proxy. Unfortunately, the latest figures date from 2004. Quebec has the highest percentage of Canadian-educated physicians at about 90%. It also has, proportionately speaking, the fewest MAiD requests that actually lead to MAiD. Many are withdrawn or deemed ineligible, or the requester dies before euthanasia can be provided. Perhaps Quebec physicians are more likely to sit down with the requester and discuss the pros and cons of euthanasia. Conversely, Saskatchewan has the lowest percentage of Canadian-educated physicians, and its MAiD deaths are disproportionately white, surpassed only by Ontario and British Columbia in this regard. Saskatchewan is otherwise more like neighboring Alberta or even Atlantic Canada, comprising mostly small towns, with non-whites being largely Indigenous people on reserves. Traditional small-town living in itself does not seem to protect Euro-Canadians from euthanasia. If we compare the percentage of foreign-educated physicians with white overrepresentation in MAiD deaths across provinces, we get a modest but non-significant correlation of 0.30. We therefore cannot draw any conclusions about this factor, although it deserves further study with better and more recent data. So MAiD was legalized in Canada as a human right. That is, everyone has the right to choose the time and place of their death. Nonetheless, this choice and its subsequent approval should be viewed within a broader context. All right, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to move on now from that. Right? So assisted dying now accounts for 1 in 20 deaths. And we've looked at the euthanized while white. We've looked at a lot of this article here. Let me go down here. Is wokeness a factor? Woke ideology does seem to play a role. The more prevalent it is, the more euthanasia is disproportionately white. I agree with this. This factor is noticeably less prevalent in French Canada, partly because of the language barrier, the existence of separate institutions, and general mistrust of Canadian political culture. Analogous mistrust may have led similar consequences in Alberta. Right? Now, I'm not going to go into everything here. All right, so we're going to go to this article here. So again, now I want to move forward. The Canadian government estimates that it can save over $1 trillion if they kill 14.7% million Canadians with MAiD. Canada has become the best of the best in the world at harvesting organs. All right, I want to go to this, right? I want you to listen to this. You can save. So I want to listen to what this woman says here. We're gonna pause it right there. I'm gonna make sure you can hear it. Tell me. Let's make it a little bit bigger here.
You open the door to killing. You don't get to close or decide what walks through.
But Kelsey, what would be the incentive? What is the motive?
Ready? I got one for you.
Because you got to have a motive.
Money. Let me show you how.
Where is it? Someone dies, it's over. Chronicity is big business.
No. This is where you're wrong here, darling. End of life is money time. Okay? So, Canada, a new journal on the SAGE journal on the Omega website. You can go find it on SAGE. You know, the medical journals that are peer-reviewed papers from universities.
This is where it's going to lead to involuntary.
It's called the Journal of Death and Dying. It came out this year.
Okay.
And they did an estimate of what Canada looks to save once they turn the mental illness into the MAiD protocol. So from 2027 to 2047, which is a 20-year period, that is when mental illness, meaning anybody can qualify. You don't have to be dying anymore, sweetheart. You can just have a hard time. And once you're in the system, you're in it.
So it doesn't cost them money to treat you through the government, so they save money.
You ready to find out how much? 2027 to 2047, they're expected to use MAiD on roughly, this is the journal's, they've done the math, this is the journal's estimate, 14.7 million Canadians. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to save to a tune of $1.273 trillion
Wow.
instead of providing palliative
Wow.
care.
You see where this is leading. Right, you see where that's leading, right? Involuntary MAiD. So here's the link to the report, right? And I'm going to go, let's go to it now. I think I might even have it here. Oh, it wants to verify. Let it verify. Okay, there's our Sage journals. I'll accept it. Okay, I need to make that a little bit bigger for me. Just hold on a sec. There we are. So this study explores the potential economic savings from economic savings. This is the involuntary. Remember I mentioned earlier that it will eventually be involuntary, and the doctor decides whether you live or not. Why? Because you're going to save the system, our universal healthcare system, taxpayer system with an aging population, baby boomer system, tons of money, and then they can extend it to those with mental illness as the sole reason for qualifying for MAiD. So there'll be a younger population and they can harvest those organs. You see where we're going with this, right, folks? So where it is currently a leading cause of death to include vulnerable groups that cost the government more than they contribute in taxes. These groups include individuals with severe mental health issues, the homeless, drug users, like we got down here in Oshawa, all the way down Simcoe there, all the fent benders. By the way, all of them, 99%, just my eyes don't lie, 99% of fentanyl addicts are white, WHITE, right? And it's a Chinese drug cartel in cahoots with our federal government, or with our governments, not federal, but all of our governments at all levels, that are bringing this fentanyl into this country and targeting white people. You can't tell me there ain't a white genocide in this country. There is. The love of money is the root of all evil. Right, these groups include individuals with severe mental health issues, the homeless, drug users, retired elderly, and indigenous communities. Both voluntary and non-voluntary scenarios were analyzed, projecting total savings of up to $1.273 trillion by 2047, with an estimated 2.6 million deaths in the voluntary scenario, most among mentally ill and elderly populations. This cost-saving measure raises significant ethical concerns. Financially incentivizing MAiD could shift healthcare priorities away from providing necessary support, potentially devaluing vulnerable lives and fostering a troubling reliance on assisted death as an economic solution. These findings highlight a need for ethical scrutiny of MAiD expansion. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you get where we're going here. Now I'm going to move forward here. I'm going to read off my little script here. So Aktion Team Forum, named after the Berlin Address, Tiergarten Straße 4, was the centralized Nazi program from 1939 to 1941 with decentralized continuation afterward, that systematically murdered people with disabilities, mental illnesses, right? Just think about this right now. By March of 2027, mental illness is stated to be, or mental illness will be eligible criteria. So mental illness alone, if you will, can be deemed as a sole criteria for eligibility for MAiD, right? So mental illnesses and others deemed life unworthy of life, or economic burdens. You've just seen this report here. Economic burdens. They stand to save money, right? It used deception medical questionnaires. By the way, our new census is more detailed. It hasn't reached me yet, but in Canada, the 2026 census is very detailed, right? Gas chambers disguised, lethal injections, and starvation. Historians estimate 70,000 killed in the main gassing phase across 6 centers, Grafeneck, Brandenburg, Hartheim, Sonnestein, Bernburg, and Hadamar, with total euthanasia victims, including children, while decentralized killings and extensions reaching 2,000 to 300,000 plus. It served as a training ground and model for later Holocaust killing methods and personal transfers. Example of this is the Operation Reinhard camps. Now I'm going to read another article here from Forbes. And I actually, because I had to go behind a paywall, I saved it here to get it. And it's entitled, and this is going back to August of 2022, Canada's new euthanasia laws carry upsetting Nazi-era echoes. Canada's new euthanasia laws carry upsetting Nazi-era echoes, warns expert, by Gus Alexiou, former contributor, right? And I'm going to go to that article right now. Let me just, right here. You know what? Let me just, it's probably easier for me to go here. Sermons. All right. And now I'm going to just, date added. This is the one I want to open up here. Oh, there we are. Okay. Let me just move that up a little bit. Let me just close that. And then this one, I'm going to move up. Let me just move that up here. There we go. There we go. Canada's new euthanasia laws carrying upsetting Nazi-era echoes, warns expert, right? Let me make that a little bit bigger here for you as well. Okay, let me just move it down here. Well, that might be too big. Let me just make it a bit smaller. Canada's extremely liberal euthanasia laws, which next year, right, this is 2022, are set to be extended, and they have already, right, to include people suffering from mental health conditions and potentially minors. This was put on hold, but 2027, it's stated to become law, had been slammed for being reminiscent of the way the Nazis dealt with people with disabilities by a leading academic in the field. I like to click on that article, right? Open Safari. I'm going to come back to that. I'm worthy to live. Yeah, I went into that already. And I'm going to read this, by the way, after. All right, there we are. In an article published by the Associated Press, right, let's go back 4 years, Tim Staton, director of the Canadian Institute for Inclusion and Citizenship at the University of British Columbia, said the country's uniquely permissive euthanasia laws were, quote, probably the biggest existential threat to disabled people since the Nazis' program in Germany in the 1930s. The Associated Press article additionally detailed the story of a 61-year-old Alan Nichols who had a history of hearing loss and depression, and according to Nichols' brother, was unlawfully put to death by the Canadian state in 2019. Though Nichols' family cited a pitiful lack of oversight and gross negligence on behalf of the medical professionals treating him, the Canadian Mounted Police, in conjunction with British Columbia's health ministry, declined to bring forth any criminal charges. Nevertheless, the people allied to the upcoming expansion of the laws governing euthanasia in Canada in 2023, which have passed, by the way, raises serious questions. Could it be that a country renowned for its liberal universalism and libertarian fundamentalism has grotesquely perverted the principle of accessibility when it comes to medical assisted dying? Accessibility in most cases, that precious ethos and lifeblood which allows people with disabilities to thrive as functioning members of society. Yet within this sphere, unfettered accessibility could indeed prove to be one of the most malignant forces the disability community has had to contend with since the mercy killings of the Third Reich almost 9 decades ago. Global issue here. Around the world, euthanasia, where doctors use lethal doses of drugs to end lives of patients with terminal and chronic illnesses, is legal in Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, and Spain, and certain parts of Australia. Additionally, several U.S. states, including California, Colorado, and New Jersey, permit a format in which a physician can prescribe barbiturates that are then self-administered by the patient. Canada's euthanasia laws came into force in 2016. Result now it goes on here. Move on here. Proponents of the practice in Canada claim there are robust checks and balances in place, and Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos said the national euthanasia law recognizes the rights of all persons as well as the inherent and equal value of every life. Nevertheless, there exist several trends and protocols that set Canada apart from other territories in which euthanasia is legal that have led opponents to express concern that the country's medical establishment is faltering on a precipice. Unlike Belgium and the Netherlands, there is no monthly commissions in place to review problematic cases, whilst in Canada, the procedure itself can be undertaken by a nurse practitioner rather than purely being restricted to doctors. Perhaps most troubling of all, and where the issue has become most politicized and conflated with liberal fundamentalism, is the matter in which euthanasia is proactively proposed as a treatment option by physicians caring for patients. By the way, if I have to face this, right, I will certainly be giving them the third degree, right? And let's consider my mother. They will be getting the third degree and they would be shut down immediately. Whereas in other countries where it is legal, euthanasia appears to be more siloed away from all other medical remediations and viewed as something altogether separate. In Canada, it appears to be more deliberately inserted into routine dialogue between doctors and their patients. For eligible patients who don't need to have a terminal illness but simply a life-limiting disability, it is not so much that physicians are encouraging them to choose euthanasia, but rather proposing it as a choice of equal standing amongst other options for treatment and palliative care. In some situations, without the patient themselves raising the topic. Living with Dignity, Dr. Ramona Coelho, a Canadian family physician, told the Associated Press, quote, "The whole premise of the legislation is built on a discriminatory approach to people with disabilities." Further continuing, quote, "Most Canadians think that this is a service of compassion offered for people who have nothing left to be offered and are being offered death as a way out, when in fact the system is being applied so liberally and so easily in such a short time period that people are dying who would have recovered with greater care and resources to live." It is a view echoed by Marie-Claude Landry, head of the country's Human Rights Commission, who said that euthanasia, quote, "cannot be a default for Canada to fulfill its human rights obligations." Addressing the notion that when patients are presented with treatment options by doctors, they are likely to be viewing their future life with disability through the lens of economic deprivation. Landry said, quote, "In an era where we recognize the right to die with dignity, we must do more to guarantee the right to live with dignity." Well, by the way, killing somebody is not the right to die with dignity. Last year, 3 United Nations human rights experts condemned the Canadian legislation as having a discriminatory impact on disabled people and running contrary to international human rights standards. Meanwhile, a recent visit to the country, Pope Francis attacked Canada's culture of utilitarianism when it comes to its euthanasia policy, deploring the fact that patients who in place of affection are administered death. Some may argue that interventions based on religious precepts simply risk polarizing a debate that is worthwhile and can no longer be sidestepped by any country in the world. By the way, this is not a debate. Should never be on the table. Should be illegal. Should be abolished. Just like I'm an abolitionist for abortion, I'm an abolitionist for medical assistance in dying. It should die on the operating table. And by the way, I'm talking about the concept of MAiD and not the patient. Surely the real danger lies in the vagueness, latitude, and sense of laissez-faire brought about by the unique interplay of such ethically complex and emotive policy area and Prime Minister this time this was obviously Justin Trudeau's unbreakable pact with liberal universalism. There are unlikely to be any easy answers here. However, a starting point might be to acknowledge accessibility should only possess the remit of upholding the primacy of the welfare of people with disabilities and never be hijacked as a facade to prop up significantly wider political ideals. It should be abolished. But you can see, again, get back to our previous point, where the government is openly saying that they're going to save money, right? So there's an economic tax, obviously, because our healthcare system right now is being burdened, deliberately burdened, by the way, with the influx of migrants into this country, and our country cannot handle that, the amount. I mean, was it over 5 million, 6 million in the past 5 years? That's a huge jump in a country the size of Canada, whose population is around 40 million right now. So I wanted to go to something else. How the Nazis... Oh, here, this is it. I wanted... There was another one. I had another one here. Unworthy to Live. Yeah, this is it. Facing History. I want to close with this article, by the way. Now we'll make this bigger. Right, so we're going to draw the connections. As Adolf Hitler consolidated his power at home in anticipation of war, he moved not only against Jews, Sinti and Roma, those are the gypsies, by the way, but also against those Aryans whom he considered unworthy of life, right? Right, these are the white people. People with epilepsy, alcoholism, birth defects, hearing loss, mental illnesses, and personality disorders, as well as those who had vision loss, or developmental delays, or who even suffered from certain orthopedic problems. Hitler viewed them as marginal human beings who had to make a case for their own survival at a time when the nation was preparing for war. By the way, I believe this is where Canada's heading. Yeah, government orchestrated suicide, a murder. Let's call it what it is. It's murder, right? If you seek to commit suicide, you're murdering yourself, right? The first to be eliminated were too young to speak on their own behalf. In the fall of 1938, the parents of a severely disabled infant petitioned Hitler for the right to kill their child. What do you think of like modernism in Germany and the shift away from the precepts of the Word of God? And this is where it leads, by the way, folks. He granted the petition and saw in the request an opportunity to encourage what he called mercy killings or euthanasia. This is what Canada is doing today. Right now it is voluntary, but now with certain cases, and I can't go into every case and look it up on the internet, but recently it has been coerced. There's been an element of coercion. In fact, according to science historian Robert N. Proctor, the goal was not to provide mercy to the victims, but to improve, the Aryan race and make hospital beds and personnel available for the coming war. Hitler also thought that the war might minimize protests from Germans who learned of the deaths. According to Hitler's chief medical officer, the Fuhrer was of the opinion that such a program could be put into effect more smoothly and rapidly in time of war, and that in the general upheaval of war, the open resistance anticipated from the church would not play the part it might in other circumstances. The following spring, Hitler set up a committee of physicians to prepare for the murder of mentally and physically disabled children. Known as the Reich Committee for the Scientific Treatment of Severe Hereditary and Congenital Diseases, the group was told to keep its mission secret. In August of 1939, just 2 weeks before the invasion of Poland, committee members asked doctors and midwives to fill out a questionnaire that would identify children born with various deformities or disabilities. Initially, the focus was on children under the age of 3. The committee claimed it was using the information to clarify certain scientific questions. In fact, it was used to determine which children would be allowed to live. The committee relied entirely on the questionnaires in making its decisions. Members did not examine a single child, consult with other physicians, or speak to the families involved. Once a decision was made, the committee told the children's parents only that their baby was being placed in a special hospital to, quote, improve treatment. There, death came quickly. After the war, a physician involved in the program told Robert J. Lifton, an American psychiatrist, quote, according to the thinking of that time, in the case of children, killing seems somehow justifiable, whereas in the case of the adult mentally ill, that was definitely murder. The physician went on to describe how nurses were ordered to give the children sedatives that were harmless in small amounts but deadly in large doses. The doctor noted, and with these sedatives, the child sleeps. If one does not know what is going on, the child is sleeping. When reality has to be let in on to know that. I think there's a typo here. He really is being killed and not sedated, Lifton added. While Dr. F admitted that one might wonder about the child, why is he sleeping so much? He insisted quite erroneously that one could ignore that inner question because, quote, the death rate of those killed wasn't much above the regular death rate with such children. This is when one has zero value for life and the sanctity of it. Quote, he stressed the absence of either a direct command, quote, if either I get the order to kill, I think I would refuse, but certainly there was no such order. Or of manifest homicide. Quote, I mean, if you had directed a nurse to go from bed to bed shooting these children, that would not have worked. As a result, there was no killing, strictly speaking. People felt this is not murder, it is putting to sleep. They were treating these children as if they're putting down their dog. Now, in addition to the use of drugs, victims were murdered by a variety of other methods, including poisoning, starvation, being left to die of exposure in unheated buildings, and gassing. The operation was later expanded to include not only children but also teens and adults, and it was given the code name T4. One euthanasia expert excused the murders by arguing, quote, the idea is unbearable to me that the flower of our youth must lose its life at the front in order that the feeble-minded and asocial elements can have a secure existence in the asylum. Wow. Another suggested that a physician's duty is to rescue the fit for the future by weeding out the unfit in the present. Although the Nazis considered the euthanasia program top secret, it was a difficult secret to keep. Some Germans were certain to notice the sudden deaths of large numbers of disabled people at various institutions in their communities, and Nazi officials struggled to find a satisfactory explanation or satisfactory explanations. In addition, family members often grew suspicious of the sudden deaths of patients soon after their transfer to new facilities, which were in fact killing centers. The Nazis also made bureaucratic mistakes in their notifications to the families of victims, sometimes claiming a cause of death that seemed unlikely, if not impossible, such as claiming that a burst appendix caused the death of a child whose appendix had already been removed. According to scholar Carol Poor, By the late summer of 1940, the euthanasia program had become common knowledge among Germans and in other countries. Among Germans who knew of the euthanasia program, many supported it. In some cases, the parents of mentally or physically disabled children were quote, eager to rid themselves of the stigma of having defective children. Racial ideology and propaganda in the 1930s had also helped to build support in Germany for eliminating mentally ill adults. In addition, according to Proctor, doctors were never ordered to murder psychiatric patients and handicapped children. They were empowered to do so and fulfilled that task without protest, often on their own initiative. Hitler's original memo was not an order, but an empowerment granting physicians permission to act. In some places, doctors used mobile gassing vans to carry out the killings. By June of 1940, the vans were being replaced with gas chambers that resembled showers. Proctor adds, quote, by August 24th of 1941, when the first phase of this adult operation was brought to an end, over 70,000 patients from more than 100 hospitals have been killed. The operation would turn out to provide a model for subsequent murder of millions of Jews, Roma, Sinti, and others in gas chambers. And the connection questions here. Was it suggested by the terms mercy killing and euthanasia? Was either of these the goal of the Nazi program? Who decided who would live and who would die? By the way, this is where I believe Canada is heading very soon. Yeah, Darwinians, democide, absolutely. Does it matter who makes the decision? How did the war influence both the justification for and the timing of the euthanasia program? What is the difference between being ordered and being empowered to do something? What factors may have motivated doctors to carry out the killings of mentally and physically disabled people? What distinction does the doctor that Robert J. Lifton interviewed make between murder and putting to sleep like you're some dog? I'm just putting my dog to sleep. You put your dog to sleep. You don't put your child to sleep. How does he distinguish between the killing of young children and the killing of adults? Do you think euphemisms, gentle expressions used to describe unpleasant things, right? Compassionate care, compassion in dying, right, like Canada uses. Do you think euphemisms, gentle expressions used to describe unpleasant things made the killings easier to justify? Why not? Canada's doing the same thing with MAiD, compassionate care in dying. And here, what should be the role of doctors in society? What ethical standards should guide their behavior? I'll tell you what standards should guide all of their behavior. The Word of God. This book right here, this King James Bible, should be their guide. Nothing else. But we have turned our back on God. And this is what you get. And again, Darwinians, when you throw God out of the equation, this is what you get. When man becomes the arbiter of what is true and what is right and what is moral, right? The arbiter of that, we have a society that sees no problem with killing, right? With assisted suicide, whether it be killing the unborn or killing the elderly or killing the infirm. You see it. You have a society that will readily embrace that. We are there in this country, folks. We are there right now. And things are going to get worse. And you wonder when they're going to start rounding up Christians and preachers, Christians, under the pretext of mental illness, diagnosing them with a mental illness. And then under the doctor's recommendation that, you know what, maybe they should receive MAiD because of such and such condition, and they're unable to make this decision on their own. I believe we're heading in that direction, and very quickly, folks. Very quickly. So again, our opening text here, and I'm going to go to it. Right? For whoso findeth life findeth me, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. But he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. Obviously speaking from wisdom above, which comes from God, flows from God. Right? All they, the heathen, love death. Oh, Pastor Cooley's tuning in right now. He knows, and he can attest to this, when he's preaching out in the street to the heathen, the lost heathen, they love death. They revel in it. They cheer it on. In fact, what was one of the most common things that they tell us? Go kill yourself. Yeah. So we're heading in this country, folks. So this brings this broadcast to a close.